Will F1 really expand the amount of teams in Formula 1? Well, they should. So as we all know, earlier this year, the FIA put out something called an expression of interest in a very handy-dandy 2-page document. I'll just give you the summary here because we've got things to do, okay? The FIA is seeking new teams for Formula 1 to join between 2025 and 2027. Probably might be wise to do it after 2025 because they'll be having one regulation and then going to a brand new regulation. It's going to be a lot of headaches for all concerned. Interested parties might submit a preliminary expression of interest with required information and pay a non-refundable administration fee of $20,000. The overall application fee is about 300 grand, by the way. The selection criteria for the formal application process includes technical ability, financial resources, compliance with regulations, experience, sustainability, and societal benefit. In short, don't be an Andrea Moda. The team cap is 12, so no more than 24 drivers on the grid. The deadline for these applications was actually the end of April, and the formal decision was actually made at the end of June, so the FIA technically knows who may join the grid, or at least is going to go to the next round, but they're not going to be saying anything until the end of this month. If the current teams had their way, no one will be joining because they want to have their precious TV money and, they don't want extra competition. It'll be taking away from the glamour and the glitz of Formula 1 because 10 teams is all they can do. 12 teams are impossible! We had 12 teams about 10 years ago, guys, and yeah, some of them weren't great, but it was entirely possible. Quite frankly, that opinion, guys, stinks. As far as I can tell, there are 5 teams that have actually expressed interest and have made it public, so who are they most likely? So let's just get this one out of the way. Andretti Cadillac. For months, Michael Andretti has been saying, we want to get into Formula 1, we're going to do everything possible to convince you guys that we are being serious here, because of course, many people over the years have actually said, we want to get into F1. Okay, how are you going to do it? Somehow! This whole situation reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Cool Runnings. Andretti is doing everything possible to actually show they can actually do it. They're doing everything that is being asked of them, but the governing body's actually then changing the rules to try and make it harder for them, and basically are just trying to make it more difficult. That might be about to change because the FIA chairman has actually been sort of bigging them up now. Most likely because the decision's already been made, so he feels maybe a bit more willing to actually speak out about it, but let me give you what he actually said about it. I'm not breaking rules, but do we allow anyone to enter? No. But how on earth can we refuse GM? I mean, where's the common sense in this? GM is a heavyweight, and when they come with Andretti, that's good for all of us. You see, folks, General Motors. General Motors is one of the biggest automakers in the world. And if Andretti's been able to convince General Motors and their Cadillac arm to actually partner with them in Formula 1, then surely this is the most obvious decision. Yes, of course, some people may have queries with Michael Andretti himself, but the backing going into this is pretty solid. There are billions attached to General Motors. They can easily finance a campaign, but at the moment it seems likely that it's not going to be a full-on engine thing with Cadillac and General Motors. It's more like a naming scheme as well as financial backing, sort of a more effective way of what Ford's doing with Red Bull powertrains, except Ford's basically just wanting to piggyback off the Red Bull glory. This whole situation looks a bit more authentic. This could be sewn up as an independent outfit, but I think more realistically, it might be a situation where they buy out a current team. And I think it's going to be Alpine, because Laurent Rossi, as he's been showing us, and I've mentioned in previous videos, he's starting to find ways of cutting costs and making sure that the financial responsibility of the Renault Group is minimal. They are staring 6th place in the Constructors in the face after McLaren's recent surge, and now they're selling bits off to outside investors, so maybe Andretti might be one of these and slowly ups his stake to ultimately becoming a majority shareholder. So long as those people at Ensign can keep their jobs, that'd be cool. And Renault did state they would supply power units to Andretti if their bid was actually successful. So there is some connection there already. I think they could maybe get an independent slot of their own, so maybe one of those slots is already slated, with of course the chairman bigging them up, so who else could take that other slot? Because if we're only going to have 12 teams, then who else? Well, there's Hitech. This one seems to be decent because they are a team which has been around for a good few years. They have F2 and F3 teams. Performances in F2 recently have been okay. They're 4th and 5th, and this year may not be so great, but it's a very competitive field this year. And they do have backing. They have the likes of Vladimir Kim, who is a Kazakhstani billionaire, so okay, they've got that. And then, okay, who else have they been involved with? Oh, that guy. Oh, right. Well, good thing they changed that. But yeah, overall, Hitech seems to be okay. They're a British-based team. They've been around for about 20 years or so. They have a good pedigree. It may not be as glamorous as the likes of Prema or Dams or Carlin, but it's certainly decent enough. With all of that backing, they could get potentially a slot of their own, but maybe they might want to sort of get into bed with an existing team, perhaps. One particular team I do have an inkling for, this is not substantiated by the way, this is only my personal musing, would be Haas. Because Haas seems to be picking up naming rights from practically every other corner of the paddock, because they got now into bed with Alfa Romeo after having gotten money from MoneyGram. So at the moment it's Alfa Romeo, MoneyGram, Haas F1 team. So why not have Alfa Romeo, MoneyGram, Hitech, Haas F1 team? Or just rename the team to Hitech, and it's run by Gene Haas, because Gene Haas obviously wants to make sure that he's not spending nearly as much on that Formula One team. So why not you just get outside influencers? Hitech have a good arm in the UK, so get them to help out as well. So it's a potential option, of course. But then again, this is all off the back of potentially one single billionaire, and the last time we really had that was Vijay Mallya and the whole Force India Racing Point situation. Then we got the likes of Formula Equal, led by Craig Pollock. Now, if you're familiar with that name, I wouldn't blame you, because that guy is one of the people who spearheaded the campaign to buy out the likes of the Tyrrell team, that then became British American Racing, or BAR, and then that became Honda, then that became Braun, and now it's currently the Mercedes team. So Craig Pollock was one of the chains in that particularly interesting long history of that particular team that started off as Tyrrell. Why is it called Formula Equal then? Well, it's meant to be about having a 50-50 split in terms of male and female workers. So okay, that is a noble idea of getting more women into motorsport. We got Susie Wolf, for example, who's spearheading the F1 Academy. We got Hannah Schmitz, who's one of the Red Bull strategists. Bernie Collins, who's now doing a really good job as a pundit on Sky Sports. Go on it, I like this idea initially. They've expressed an interest to join Formula One in 2025 or 2026. But again, I really think you should join in 2026 so you have a clean slate, so you're not having to do one set of regs and then another pair of regs. So yeah, so okay, all right, this sounds pretty good. Craig Pollock, he has had experience in Formula One, even though his reputation with the FIA in Formula One has been a little bit wibbly wobbly over the last couple of decades. But okay, well, what's their backing? A Gulf-based country. So it's vague then. We've not really heard any more about this outfit since the likes of March, so there's been really little information in recent times, but it is out there, and hopefully the likes of the FIA are aware of whoever this Gulf backer is, and maybe this might actually add some legitimacy based on all of the connections that Formula One has in the region. Okay, well, if the 50-50 model is going to be applied to the workforce, then are you going to have a female driver in there, Craig? Well, the next team are actually looking to potentially hire the likes of Jamie Chadwick and get her into Formula One, Rodin Carlin. This idea is super rock solid because the CEO of Rodin Carlin, David Dicker, an Australian multi-millionaire, by the way, the Rodin part of that is Rodin Cars. It's a New Zealand car manufacturer, so that's why it's called Rodin Carlin, because they're a majority stakeholder of the now Carlin team, who was founded by Trevor Carlin partially. Mr. Dicker says the odds of them getting an FIA slot is a little bit tricky, but they're gonna give it a darn good go. He's plucky, I'll give you that. But the team he's actually bought into, Carlin, is probably one of the best in the junior formulae. They have so many drivers on their previous roster, going back to 1996. Here's just a sample of who they've actually had. So they've had Sebastian Vettel on their books, Nico Rosberg, Robert Kubica, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Takuma Sato, Daniel Ricciardo, and of course, Lando Norris. And going back to just 2020, Yuki Tsunoda, for example, Liam Lawson, the potential AlphaTauri candidate for whatever year, is part of their wheelhouse at some point in their life. That's a good pedigree, and this is why I feel like it'd go either way, a unique team slot or a buyout of another team. Sure, David Dicker is actually quite rich, but I don't feel like his general wealth might be enough to maybe stump up the actual fee that Stefano Domenicali wants, which is of course $1 billion. But like I said in my previous video, what I think will most likely happen is that maybe Carlin and Red Bull might work something out to the eventual buyout of the AlphaTauri team. So Carlin starts to get involved with the operations of AlphaTauri, bringing in some people, bringing in some logistics, maybe bringing in some people to actually help run Lauren Mekies, who's going to be the new team principal next year. And then eventually it might be sold off if the model of going back to a Red Bull style thing with Toro Rosso doesn't work out. And then maybe Red Bull can actually maintain the relationship of having their junior drivers go into that, their first hop into Formula One, but just have Carlin run the operations. So they actually get the best of both worlds. So they still get their Red Bull junior drivers in without actually having to run run a team themselves. So, you know, that could be really beneficial. So, Rodin Carlin, I think the best thing for them to do with the resources that they have is just get into bed with AlphaTauri or whatever they're going to call themselves next year. I think everyone will be backing that, including the teams that went through Carlin. I'm pretty sure that whatever statement they would put out, they say, oh yeah, that's a really good choice, including Lando Norris. Then the last one is LKYSUNZ. Okay, what's that? Oh, right. It's the renamed Panthera thing from earlier this year. Benjamin Durand, their CEO, are very keen to get this team on the grid, and there's really not much known about them otherwise. It's based in Southeast Asia, and now their new brief under the name LKYSUNZ and not Panthera is to actually bring up inclusivity and diversity into Formula One. Make it more for the fans, this team. So it's like a team run by fans for fans. And I get the idea to really capitalize on the younger demographic coming into Formula One, make it more relatable to them. So that seems like a really good idea. And their website has a fairly good sort of mission statement video when you actually click onto their website. But the point is, though, is that we don't really know much else about them. Is that rumored Asian billionaire Calvin Lowe actually still attached to this thing from the days of Panthera? Because they're actually using the same application that they did earlier this year, but just with a different name. It does seem like a nice idea, but I'd really like to know more about this. But until then, I'm really going to reserve judgment, but it's out there, they made it public, so I just thought I'd include it into this video. I feel like the most likely candidate for a new team in Formula One is going to be Andretti because, you know, you had comments from the FIA chairman themselves about praising their backers in General Motors. Then ideally, I think that Carlin might get a slot, but it'd probably more likely be a buyout of the AlphaTauri outfit or the second Red Bull team. Then with Hitech, yeah, I think so, but its long-term success, that's a little bit up for debate, but I think they might get a go, at least in 2026. But then Formula Equal does have a decent thing as well, especially if they actually make it clear who their Gulf backer is. And then LKYSUNZ, well, honestly, I wish them the best of luck. I really do.